Welcome back. It's nice to see you again. In today's episode, we're going to be showing you how to make this Peter McKinnon style intro. If you are not familiar with what Peter McKinnon's intro to his videos looks like, let's let it roll for you really quick. Oh man, I'm so excited to make this one. If you haven't figured this out already, this is a big one. So there's a couple things you need to know going in. We've got all the plugins for free down below if you want to download them. I'm also going to show you how to make all of this stuff from scratch in Final Cut Pro. I'm also using a bunch of stock photos from unsplash.com to fill in for all of these clips that I don't have of Peter McKinnon's. So if you'd like to go get your own photos from unsplash.com, please do that now so you can follow along. I've also got chapter markers, so if there's a specific effect that you want to skip ahead to, please take advantage of those and skip right to the effect that you're interested in. And last but not least, if you are new here, please let me know in the comments below which effects, titles, transitions from your favorite YouTubers, TV shows, or movies you want to see me do next, and I will be sure to make a video about that for you. Alright, let's jump in. To make sure we match everything just right, I've already got a copy of Peter McKinnon's intro in my timeline, and I've got all my stock photos from Unsplash right here ready to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this one in to get it started. I'm going to use the blade tool to cut it to size. You can see I've got these markers to help me know where each of the clips and the transitions more or less starts or ends. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to scale this guy up a little bit to make it fill the frame. Now, the first plugin that I'm going to introduce you to, since we're working with a bunch of stock photos instead of videos like most of Peter McKinnon's clips, I've created this drift in effect. Again, download it below. But basically all it does is it's the equivalent of putting a keyframe at the beginning and end of your clip and just making it slowly grow in scale over time. So if you don't want to download the plugin, that's all you have to do. Set 2 keyframes. We just have so many clips that I wanted to save myself some time, and so I made this plugin. Alright, that looks pretty good with the default 6%. It just brings our still photo to life a little bit. Now, this first effect we're going to be recreating is this film scrolling effect that he's got where it looks like you have clips from a film reel scrolling past. Now, right away, this is a clip that makes me know for a fact that he didn't build this in something like Final Cut. He probably used After Effects or Motion. And it's because there's like a little bit of a bounce to the movement, and you're going to hear me say that throughout this. There's just a little bit of bounce and spring and stuff that you really can't get very well in Final Cut. But with that said, if Final Cut is all you have, we can match this movement pretty good. It's just a little bit of a workaround. So let's dive into it. So how we're going to recreate it in Final Cut is we're just going to create a compound clip out of this. We're going to double click into it and then option drag up to duplicate the clip. Now what we need is, as the film is rolling, we need a copy of the clip to come down from the top. So we have this sort of film frames scrolling and then bouncing effect. So now that we've copied it, all we're going to do is we're just going to drag the Y position up so that it's just barely outside of our frame. And that's it. We have enough so that we can make it bounce. Now if we come back over here and we grab our transform, you can see that if we just scroll that up and down, that we're pretty close to the right effect as it is. We just need to set some keyframes to make it slide in and bounce the way Peter's does. I'm just going to turn this opacity down so that we can match it up. You can see from the beginning it starts a little past halfway, so we're just going to drag ours down and we're going to set a keyframe here. Then we're going to skip ahead a few frames. Oh, and this is where we've already run into a problem. Because Peter's is probably using some sort of an effect and is not just manually copying these. He's got lots of copies that he can scroll through. So we need to even introduce a third copy here to fill in that extra space. So we're going to do the same thing. Option drag to duplicate it. We're going to zoom out so that we can kind of see what we're working with here, give ourselves a sense of space. Now that we've got this clip, we just want to come over to its transform and we just want to crank it up. I found something like 4950 works pretty good for this clip, but you just have to tinker with it to make your photo match. All right, so now we have our third frame up on the top. We can line that up there. Skip ahead a few frames, line it up again. And because we already had a keyframe set, it is setting new keyframes as we move along here. We're just going to keep going and matching these up. Now if we turn the opacity back up and just step through this, you can see that it actually looks pretty darn good. There's a little bit about the motion that doesn't feel as naturally bouncy and fluid, as it would be if we were just using something like motion, but I think it matches his animation almost perfectly. Now, if you do want to just use the plugin provided, it's pretty easy. We'll just come over here to wherever you installed it. It's called the horizontal clone bounce. All we have to do to make this work is we just scale it up and we press play, and you can see it just has this nice, natural, smooth bouncing. It doesn't perfectly match Peter McKinnon's. You can tune the start value parameter to try to get that bounce matching his exactly right if you want, but I think it matches the feel of his very accurately. All right, let's move on to the next part. What we're building next is the diamond wipe transition and the push transition. We're going to start the same way we did with the previous effect, where we're going to grab a stock photo down from our library, trim it down to size. If we go ahead and select this, we're going to scale it up. We're going to put a drift in on it. Now for wipes, if we go over to the built-in wipes transitions, you can see that you actually have quite a few wipes built into Final Cut Pro already, and some of them are pretty close, but none of them are actually the diamond. So for example, this circle wipe, if your logo was circular shaped instead of diamond shaped, I think this actually would work really well right out of the box. Doesn't need any modification. Especially if we trim it down, it's just this nice fast wipe. It feels almost like a camera lens or something. It's pretty nice. With that said, if you don't want to use the square or the circle wipe that come built in, there's not really a great way to introduce a diamond wipe transition. So that's why I've made this easy for you, and I've just provided this diamond zoom transition. Now the diamond zoom transition, I've got two versions, the diamond wipe and the diamond zoom. If we actually look at the original Peter McKinnon clip, there's a little bit of a zooming and a distortion and a bounce to the effect. And so if you want that effect, I've got diamond zoom. If you want just a clean diamond wipe, I've got that for you too. So we just drag it over here. We're going to set the duration, and I think that looks pretty great. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to introduce a push transition. We're going to press V to disable this clip that we've been working on so that we can see the original underneath it. You can see as we step through, it's just a side-to-side movement where it just slides across. And luckily for us, this is built into Final Cut Pro. So we're going to grab another stock image, scale it up, add a drift, just like we've done before, and then come all the way over here to our transitions, and we're looking for movements. If you scroll down to movements, you'll be able to find push. You can see from the preview that it gives us, push is almost exactly what we want. The default just goes up and down instead of side to side. We're just going to go ahead and press Control D and 6 to set the duration to 6 frames, and then click on the transition and come over here to the right and change the push to be right to left. And if we step through that, it looks perfect. This next clip is where things start getting really juicy. If we go ahead and step through this transition, you can see there's a lot going on. We've got two clips, it's split down the middle, we've got this colorization, and then it's got this slide over effect where we've got the two different pieces sliding over the top. Luckily for us, almost all of this is built into Final Cut, and the little piece that's not, we can accomplish with a workaround, and then I've also provided a plugin if you want to just cut straight to the finished product. We're going to start the same as every other effect by just grabbing a couple stock photos and dragging them into our timeline. I'm just going to stack each of these on top of each other since these are the two photos that I'm going to split side by side. I'm going to press Option right bracket to trim them down, and then Option G to put them into a group. Now that I've got these two clips in a group, what I need to do is split them and then move them to either side. So first thing I'm going to do is scale this model's picture up. I'm going to press V to disable it, and then scale this eye photo up, and then re-enable our photo of our model. Now normally I would just use a crop, but there's a problem. Because we need a little bit of a rotation at the end of our clip to match Peter McKinnon, we need something extra. Now, if you don't want that extra rotation, you don't need anything extra, you can just use normal crop. But if you do, you're going to go ahead and use this transformable crop that I've created as a plugin. We drag this onto our clip, and we're going to go ahead and pull our left crop over and get it pretty close to center. In fact, if we just type 1920, that is half of a 4K frame, so that will be perfectly center. And now you can see we can move the rotation without getting our dividing line moving with us. Let's just use the X to center up that model's face and reset our rotation. There we go, that sets us up.
So we're going to go ahead and put a transformable crop on our eye as well. This time we're going to crop from the right side. We're going to go 1920. And then we're going to use the X position just to get that eye centered up. And now we're all set. I'm going to jump ahead to about 12 frames just because I've counted out that's when I want my rotation to start. I'm going to set a keyframe on both of these clips, and then I'm going to press the down arrow to jump to the end of our clips. And I'm just going to put another keyframe on both, and I'm going to introduce a little bit of rotation. I think -13 actually works pretty good. And I'm going to jump to the other and do +13. So now we just have this clip that's split and then rotates outwards at the end, and that'll be right as our transition starts to happen. And that looks pretty close, and you can even see it kind of starts to line up with what we were going for. If you look here, you can actually see that rotation coming into play right there on the horizon line. Now the next thing we need is this color effect. And that's something that's actually built into Final Cut Pro. It's called Colorize. Now I've already gone and looked. These are the hex values that I think Peter used. So we're going to set the blacks to this purpley blue color. We're going to set the whites to this reddish purple color. And then the last piece is cranking that intensity. And you can see that looks pretty darn close. There's just not enough contrast. So I can come up here to my color boards and I can go to exposure, and you can see as I mess with it, the colors are getting off. The blues and the reds aren't the same colors they used to be. And that's because the color board is out of order. So if I just drag it above our colorize, you can see we get the colors, but we also get to work with our intensity and our exposure and hopefully get back some of that contrast. Now that we have our clip looking right, the last thing we need to do is actually have it split. Now, I'm going to show you how to do this with a workaround and no transitions, no plugins later in the video because we have a similar transition, but we've already done so much with this clip, I just want to keep moving, so I'm going to go ahead and use the provided transition. So go to wherever you have that installed. This one is called Simple Split. I'm going to go ahead and drag it over here, press Ctrl D to set our duration again, and you can see it actually looks really nice. It's got that split lined up right in the middle. Now with this plugin, you can actually adjust the split position if you would like, and even the blur amount. I think I'm going to turn the blur down a little bit just because Peter's looks pretty crispy. Something in the 280 range looks pretty close to right, I think. And there we go. It splits over and rotates at the end, which gets us set up to do our next transition. Our next effect is pretty much the same. It's a split, but instead of going top to bottom, it goes side to side. So because it's the same effect and to save time, I'm just going to gloss over how to get this effect. Step 1, we drag out our clips and trim them to size. Step 2, create a compound clip. Step 3, we're going to scale them up so that they fill the frame. Step 4, we're going to animate them side to side using some keyframes, the same way we animated the rotation in the previous clip. We're going to introduce a crop. We can use our regular crop because there is no rotation. And then we're going to drag over the simple split vertical transition. And finally, we're going to adjust the split position so it matches the crop position of our split clips in our compound. And just like that, we are finished. It looks pretty good too. Now, the next clip in the sequence we're actually going to skip over because it's just keyframe animation of scale and position on the clip. Stuff that we've already done a dozen times in this tutorial, so there's no point in wasting our time. We're just going to skip straight ahead to this interesting slide over sort of opening window pane transition that I think is really cool. Now this is the effect I promised earlier that we would show you how to do the transition completely in Final Cut. And that's not just to be a curmudgeon and to refuse to use plugins. That's because I actually think this transition is easier to do without any fancy transition plugins. Now you can see this transition is made of two parts. It's the sliding over clips where the center position sort of moves from left to right. And then at some point it splits open, revealing the clip behind it. Now hopefully you're starting to piece together the patterns here. We're using a lot of the same techniques. So we're going to start by dropping in a couple compound clips and just trimming them to length. We just hit Option G to create a new compound clip. Double click to enter, scale them both up to fill the frame, and then introduce a crop and get them positioned side to side. Now, the thing that's important with this particular effect is that we want them scaled up really big because there's a lot of movement from side to side, and we want to make sure that we don't run out of space on either side as it's sliding from left to right. Now that we have our clips cropped and positioned, we're going to do the split apart to reveal part of the effect. Now, I like to do this by jumping ahead about 13 frames. This is really all about feel. You're just going to need to match this in the second part of this transition. And then what I'm going to do is add a keyframe on both clips, and then jump to the end of this, compound clip, and slide them completely to either side. We're going to want to slide them a little bit farther than just off the edge of the screen because they're going to be moving around in our main timeline. So now we can just hit this arrow to jump back into our main timeline, and you can see that because we're working on this overlaid sort of timeline setup, that as our split transition happens in our compound clip, it actually reveals the real Peter McKinnon clip underneath it. And hopefully you can see where this is going, because this is exactly the effect that we're trying to build up. Now all we need to do is set a keyframe here at the end where we've got the split position the way we like, go back to the beginning, and drag it over, and now you can see as we step forward through the timeline, it has this nice split open effect. So all that's really left is just to add the clip underneath it that we want it to be revealing. To do that is really straightforward. We're just going to grab another stock photo and drag it down to our timeline, and this part will be necessary for yours if you're not working in a stacked timeline like I am, where we'll just need to grab a blank generator and slide it under our split with faces compound clip, just to fill in that extra space where our next clip doesn't actually exist. You can see where we've trimmed it. We just trimmed it not quite enough. You can see as it splits open, the blank generator is showing through. So we're just going to slide that back and then slide our new clip until we've got that nice overlap that we're looking for. I think that looks pretty good. So now what we need to do is we need to make this clip zoom, bounce, and spin into the next clip. And this is another one of those where I've provided a plugin that does a zoom spin transition. But honestly, the way Peter's does it is just kind of a match cut where he's got two clips back to back that are both spinning and zooming, and it works as a transition. There's no extra blending or blurring that's really that necessary. All right, so let's jump into it. First thing we're going to do is just drag another stock photo onto our timeline. We're going to add a drift in, and we're going to trim it to size. Now, we're not going to scale it right away, and the reason why is because the effect has a little bit of a scale to it, so we're going to handle that in a second. So if we come over here and you look at the plugin that I've provided, you can see that as we preview it, there's a little bit of a zoom, there's a spin, quite a bit of rotation actually. And then it just snaps to the next clip. So I'm going to show you how to do this without the plugin, and then we'll show you what it looks like with the plugin as well. So I'm just going to come over here to our first clip, and I'm going to add 2 keyframes, and I'm going to scale her up over time, and then I'm going to add another set of keyframes here, and this is for the rotation. And this only works if you have something that is high enough resolution that you can actually put the scale effect on there. It does work with normal resolution stuff, but if you scale it too much or have too much rotation, you'll start to see the pixelation. All right, now we grab our other clip. We're going to get it in position so that the face is kind of centered there. And then we're going to add keyframes again. This time we're just going to start large and then start the rotation in the opposite direction. And you can see if we just play that back, it actually matches really good. And it's important that you play with it to get the rotation speed to match. And that's really it for this one. Sometimes you don't need a fancy transition, you just need a good matched movement. To get this next effect, we have this black and white that sort of scrolls up the clip. This is actually really easy to accomplish in Final Cut. It's just a change to our colors to make it black and white, and then we're going to use an effects mask to make it slide up the clip. So let's start by coming over here, and we're just going to go to saturation and dial that all the way down. And then I like adding a little contrast, so I'm just going to bring down the blacks, bring up the whites. And there we go, a nice contrasty black and white image. Now to get the effect, we don't want the whole thing to be black and white, so we're going to add a shape mask up here. I'm going to zoom out just so I can see the handles a little bit better. Okay, perfect. Now let's just move this shape mask down, And we have a bunch of different handles. So these first green ones are to fit the size, and then this little white one is to get the radius or the rounding, and then the outer border is how feathered the edge is, and we want a nice crisp line. So you can see we can move this up and down, and hopefully you can imagine how we're going to get this effect. So at the end of the effect, the black and white is about halfway up the clip. So we're going to start by positioning it there, and then we're going to come over here and add a keyframe to our shape mask. I'm just going to turn down the opacity so that we can see and get the movement lined up with the clip underneath. So we just need to move it up a little bit. So I skip ahead a couple frames and drag this up. And you can see as we jump backwards, our animation for rotation doesn't perfectly align with the original. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fudge it a little bit by dragging this black and white bit off the screen until after the rotation is finished. So now we turn the opacity back up, and we've got a working black and white slide up filter. The only downside we have is we just need to make one small adjustment, because a couple of these frames you could see it clipping into the bottom as it rotates. But besides that, we're good to go. Perfect, that's all cleaned up. Okay, now the next effect is basically the same thing, but instead of black and white, it is sort of this red and purple effect. Now we're going to do it a slightly different way because we're actually combining two effects to get this color and the contrast. So first things first, as always, let's grab a stock photo and drop it onto our timeline. We're gonna do the same thing that we've always done, which is size it up so that it fits nicely, trim it down so that it fits our timeline, and then we're gonna turn down the opacity just so that we can match it up with the clip underneath. All right, that looks like it's about right. So I'm going to hold Option and drag to duplicate the clip. And turn the opacity down a little bit more. Now that we have two of these stacked on top of each other, it's a little harder to see what's going on underneath. Then we're going to come over here to Color and Colorize. Now Colorize basically remaps your darks and your lights to be new colors, and it turns into this sort of a split tone effect. Now these hex colors are just colors that I fiddled around with, and I think they look pretty close to what Peter uses, and so we're going to go ahead and use those for our darks and our lights. The effect looks close as is, but we're going to crank up that intensity so that we really get the full effect. Now if we come back in here and we turn up the opacity so that we can see what we're working with, you can see that it just lacks the contrast. So we're going to come over here and we're going to mess with our exposure a little bit. Now when we do this, you'll notice that we lose some of the color, and that's because the effects are processed in order, top to bottom. So we just need to drag it above the colorize effect, and now we can tweak it and we keep our red and bluish purple, but we can bring back some of the contrast. And that looks pretty good. Now, this color board and this colorize are the reason why we're not using a shape mask. You can't really link the mask for two effects together. So instead, we're going to come down here to our effects and go to masks, and we're going to grab a graduated mask. If you haven't used a graduated mask before, they're really easy to understand. It's just a gradient where it slowly drops off the visibility of the thing being masked. The hard part is using these two controls, which are the target and the center, to control where the cutoff is and where the gradient is, and make this nice crisp line. So what I end up doing is getting them about in position and then going over and saying, oh, look, the target is the one that I'm moving around. I'm going to make it negative 0.00 some tiny number that still shows which direction I want the cutoff to go. So that makes it so I can have this nice clean cut, and then I don't have to think about it again because all I'm doing is animating the center for the rest of this clip. And that's basically it for this effect. We're just going to go along and match it to the original and make sure it looks right, and then we're done. Just playing that back, I think that looks pretty good. All right, let's wrap up this video with the last little section. If we look at these last few clips, they are all just a different version of effects that we've already seen. So we're going to move fast on all of these just so that you can see how they're all done and even introduce a new plugin, but none of these effects are going to be new to you. So to show you what I mean, let's take a look at this first clip in the final bit of the sequence. As you step through it, you can see it's just a split film reel style effect that we've already done before. The only thing that's going to be different with this one is you can see that the top is color and the bottom is black and white. So to save ourselves time and not having to build up a compound clip like we did before, I've already created a plugin that does this exact effect, but with the option to turn part of it black and white. So to show you how it works, we're just going to throw down some stock photos. I'm going to do the same treatment we've done every single time, and then I'm going to show you how to use the black and white horizontal split effect. So we just drag it over here from our effects panel. It'll be wherever you installed it. And you can see we have some options over here on the right hand side. You can turn the top or the bottom black and white, and you can move the position just like our other effects. So let's turn down the opacity so we can see what we're doing, and let's just match up the split position. And with a couple keyframes, we've got the effect done. Let's turn the opacity up. And you can see we step through and it does the film reel effect. And then we're going to repeat the same steps on this second clip. The only thing that's important here is the same principle that we learned with our spin transition. You just need the movement to match so that it feels like there's a transition happening and it's a continuation of the same thing. Besides that, there's no fancy blending or anything else. And taking a look at the final effect, that looks pretty darn close. I like it. And with that, we are finished. If you just look at these last couple clips, we've already shown you how to do a scrolling split composition, so that's done. We've already shown you how to do this color correction, so that's done. And we've also shown you how to use gradient masks and shape masks to split your effects. So that's it. We have a working replica of the Peter McKinnon intro. If you thought this was helpful, please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to me. If you have another YouTuber, maybe a TV show or a movie, even a music video that you would like to know how they did their titles or their effects or their transitions, please let me know in the comments below so that I can show you how to reproduce those. And if you want to see more, please make sure you ring that bell. I've got lots of content coming on how to do effects and editing like Johnny Harris or MKBHD. I've even got a breakdown of a Coldplay music video coming up. I can't wait to show you guys.